What's up? How's it going? Nonsense Steve, Mason, Vishal, Locked In crew. How we doing, guys? How's the summer going for you so
Man,
far?
it feels good to be back. It's finally hot here, but that means that we just got the hot hand. We're going to spend a little money while we're doing this too. We're going to break
Sure.
down some fun things. I'm excited. So there's always money to be made. V, how are you doing, my friend? It's good to see you. It's never too early to talk. A little bit of divisional football, some futures and whatnot. How are you doing? How are you living?
Doing good. Season can't get here soon enough, and before you know it, it will start. So yeah, super excited to be here talking about some divisional outcomes for the upcoming season.
Excellent. I'm just doing some quick math here in the background, so don't mind me because I could have done this ahead of time, but that's not my style. I don't like to go that way.
It's okay. We put the pressure on for you, Steve. Me, on the other hand, I just fly by the seat of my pants. V already knows this, sees how we do the work. So, I'm happy that you're stepping into it.
He's a seasoned veteran.
I'm happy that you're stepping into the chaos.
Thank you. So we've got division futures is what we're going through today. So more or less, we're using historical data to break down, and I can post this over here now too. There we go. So we've got the historical data to help us out, but basically we're trying to get all of these up here to 2024. How are they going to finish this season? So just using the historical data of how have previous division winners or last place finishers fared the next season, and what of these groups do we think is going to have the best or least amount of success? And then from that, we'll be able to fill in the blanks with everything else, kind of make it a little bit easier for us. So first, where do you want to start? The top or the bottom? That's the fun part.
I mean, I think that I think maybe a little bit of both is probably where I would approach. But I think the first and foremost, if you were to talk about the teams at the top, and like you said, only usually 3 teams win their division again, go back to back. And we have some historical precedent.
I got that wrong. I had it backwards, but that's all right. That's
okay.
My bad.
Well, there we go.
Bad information. But basically, the historically speaking, because we're talking about divisions, right? So they went to the 4 teams per division, 8 division format back in 2002. So we have 21 years of data of the following season. How do they fare? So we have had every single season at least one team repeat 95% of the time. So 20 of the 21 seasons, at least 2 teams have had a repeat. And then we've had at least 3 teams repeat 76% of the time. So 16 out of the last 21 years. So more than likely we'll have 2 teams repeating, could have a third, potentially. We'll go through the list. And then also worst to first. So teams that finished in last place the previous season and then came back to win the division the next season. That's happened 19 of the 21 years, 91% of the time. If you were to correctly pick the 3 teams that repeat and the team that goes from worst to first based on the lowest odds currently in the consensus sport book, a $10 bet would win $110.
Yes.
On a 14 parlay for the futures. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're evaluating the historical data to see how we can kind of put these guys into their different areas.
So if we do look at that, and the first number that sticks out to me is the 2 teams 95%. That's a huge difference between the 3 teams at 76 or whatever.
The third team is at 76.
Yes. Okay. So that is a large jump from 2 to 3 in terms of statistical average. So when we talk about that, we can look into this as a 95% chance that 2 of these teams that won their division will most likely be atop it again next year. And when you look at the odds that the books are putting out right now, specifically, I have, FanDuel Sportsbook up right here. When you look at this, regardless of where you go, where you're shopping, every odds maker has the Kansas City Chiefs at a overwhelming spot to take, as well as they also have the San Francisco
San Francisco. I do love San Francisco.
San Francisco 49ers at also overwhelming odds. So on that on FanDuel here, Kansas City minus 230, and then San Francisco minus 195.
Consensus from our guys over there, betting pros, fantasy pros, whichever way you want to go.
Yes.
So Kansas City consensus across all sports books minus 225 is easily the front runner to repeat among everybody. Lance, welcome to the show. Welcome. San Francisco at minus 195 to win the West. And then, believe it or not, the only other team with minus odds in the consensus, the Atlanta Falcons. The Kirk Cousins effect, clearly.
Well, actually, fun fact, Steve, they actually had that before the signing, too.
I wouldn't doubt it with that division, but still, right. I think just firing Arthur Smith is enough to give you the division at that point. I mean, they should have won it last year, and here they are now with basically the same tools, but a better quarterback and a competent coach. So I would think that probably they should, but who knows? But based on the division winners from last season, like we just talked about, Kansas City and San Francisco are overwhelmingly the odds-on favorites to be those two teams that repeat. The third in line from previous division winners was Houston, who's plus 105 to win the AFC South again.
Yeah, and I think, that is where you have to ask a question. I think the odds makers really did hit those on the head, and you do have to ask that question about the Texans because the division is a little bit stronger. So I guess my question to you is, with those two teams at the very, very top, obviously we don't see any value there, but are you at all intrigued at anybody on those boards in the West or in the AFC and the NFC West? I mean, it's a hard ask to go against these teams, but it's also a hard ask to bet on them. What's your approach on those markets?
Yeah, in terms of just winning the division outright, I wouldn't probably feel comfortable picking anybody other than Kansas City or San Francisco. I mean, it would be fun to put some money on Arizona just because it seems like they could have a very fun offense, young Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison, all these guys. Mm-hmm. But, 13-1, you can put a couple bucks, but it's not anything that you can expect to actually happen. They're probably a year or two away from actually still competing there. You don't totally feel comfortable about Seattle out there with, you still have Geno and new coaching staff. You don't know what you're getting out of there. And then the Rams, Stafford getting older still, Aaron Donald going away, their defense is completely rebuilt. So, and then what happens in the AFC West, it's just a dumpster fire behind Kansas City all the time. So it would be very, very tough to pick anybody besides Kansas City or San Fran.
What is it now, V? 7, 8 straight? I mean,
it gets crazy. It's
the money talks. The money talks. And so the reason I asked that though is because when you look at what
it is 8 in a row, by the way, I do have that data as well.
8 in a row, right? So you just had to rub that in on me, Steve, didn't you?
Well, I just wanted to make sure you had the accurate number.
It's not because my Broncos are the.
Hey, if it makes you feel better, the Broncos broke their 3-year streak of being last in the division last season, so you got that going for you. I mean,
on our way up, baby. No, but so the reason I ask that is because when we look at it from a money-making standpoint, a lot of the times, V and I will talk about even just sprinkling a few dollars in on guys that are on teams or players that are lower on these multi-option markets, which is, just, other than yes or no, over, under, things like that. Yeah. So when you look at that and we're both sitting here going, I mean, I don't know, a lot of these are just throwaway. It really tells you all that you need to know that oddsmakers really did hit the nail on the head. So if our first indications of who these two teams in the 95% might be, it has to be those teams that the markets have indicated in the Niners and the Chiefs. I mean, Chiefs have that historical data. Niners, look unstoppable for most of the regular season pretty much every year. So that's something where I lean for those two teams that could, repeat in history, at least as of right now, where we sit in the beginning of June.
Yeah, I think the Niners come back just as strong in a division that got arguably worse. Like, you got Kyler is back for a full season, which is great for Arizona, but they also lost some weapons in addition to adding Marvin Harrison. The defense didn't get that much better. Seattle just got worse overall. LA is getting old and lost Aaron Donald. So I think they just pull away pretty easily in that division. The closest team to Kansas City in odds is the Chargers, which is just the Harbaugh effect, because that team got significantly worse than what they were last season. And yet last season they finished dead last in the division. Like I just said, they were the team that knocked Denver out of that spot. Do I think that they've done enough in this offseason to move them up ahead of the Chiefs to win the division? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, when we talk about the Chargers, it seems like every year I pick them as my sleeper to take the West, and every year I'm completely in shambles, and V laughs at me every year for it. So, you know, we're at this point that, you know, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, you know, shame on me type thing. So with the Chargers, obviously you have pluses. Herbert's going to be playing behind the best offensive line he's had in a long, long time. That's
Corey Linsley did just retire today, so we'll have to see what they do as a replacement there. But besides that, they do have a very solid full line out there.
Who retired today?
Corey Linsley.
Oh,
center. Yeah.
I did not see that, actually. That is news to me. So interesting. Yeah. I've been head down all day. So that is an interesting development. But regardless, they're still going to be really strong on the outsides, which has been their issue at times. They were very high in pressure rate this last season. And Lance, you know, I want to get your take on this too. With these teams up here at the top, we're talking about obviously the Chiefs and the Niners taking these divisions. What's your take on both of those out in the West? Any chance anybody else takes any of those? Obviously, I think the Chargers effect is an impactful one in the West. The Harbaugh effect with the Chargers. But I think they're still a couple years off from that. What's your take on those?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because Harbaugh's there, so you finally think that Herbert's going to be able to put it all together. But, you know, like I think you alluded to, that's really taken a lot of attention away from I don't want to say the lack of moves they've had in the offseason. But like you said, they've lost so much. Now, as Shaw said, they lost Corey Linsley right up the middle. And I mean, they should be better at protecting Herbert, but last year was a disaster. And so to try to bank on that is really tough. The one team that is sneaky that I'm just not ready to count out yet in the NFC West is the Rams. I mean, they've made it to the Super Bowl and won. I get San Francisco's a juggernaut, but it feels like they've just been going all in for the past 5 years. And after losing that second Super Bowl, I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden it starts to kind of wear on the players a little bit, and the staff and everything of going
they
through all the
can't get this IU thing figured out and they move him before the season starts. I could feel like that would be like the precursor to a potential semi-disaster out in San Francisco. Like that would be a tough thing for them to rebound to. It would be somewhat similar, I feel like, to what Tennessee did with A.J. Brown. Maybe not quite on that level, but it would be a tough pill to swallow out there in San Francisco. So I think that's still something to keep an eye on. If they can't get that figured out, I could get on board with what Lance is saying.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of those things where, you know, it's not really saying that they would be in last in the division, but I think the Rams have a realistic possibility of leapfrogging them, and then the Niners slot in as the wild card is pretty much the only thing I would see. I don't see the Raiders getting after the Chiefs. I don't see the Broncos. Seattle would be I guess Arizona would be, but Seattle also could sneak into the playoffs, but I don't see them winning the division. But yeah,
see, like you could make the argument for Arizona that they light it up on offense and they beat teams 45-42. And that's how they have a 10-win season. You could make that argument. You can't make that argument for Seattle. They're not going to beat you on offense. They're really not going to beat you on defense. They're going to be middle of the road. They're going to hope you beat yourself at some point. I think they're the one team I can say for sure isn't going to win the division, which of course means they'll win it now. But I feel like that's the one team I can say with certainty I have no faith in winning.
See, for me, I think one of the big things still, and so we're talking NFC West for anybody new coming into the show here. When we talk about the Rams plus 380 as of right now, and I think the big thing is that Aaron Donald is essentially the glue of that defense.
Right.
And it was fairly middling for a little while there. The last couple of years, he was kind of the only saving grace of it. And so for them to lose that, it's going to be really tough. So when you look at the division, I largely see a lot of teams that are going to track race each other. The Seahawks did do it at times. That was kind of their only thing they did have going for them sometimes, was when Geno was able to cook up a little bit of magic. But when we talk about what the Niners still do, is they still match up well in the secondary with some of these teams. And they're defensively still very strong. So it's one of those things that out of all these things, the Niners still have a very complete roster. Even when we talk about the Debo thing and the Brandon Ayuk thing, frankly, both of these, potentially unhappy receivers, I think winning, kind of sets that all aside at some point too.
Right.
I know they do want to be paid and whatnot, but this team does win at a very high clip. They know how to win. I definitely still think it's their division to lose, but I can see why the Rams aren't quite as far off, because offensively, in terms of the other teams that are in the division, they are definitely more polished and well put together, obviously. So I do agree in that facet.
In the AFC West, I think the biggest issue for Kansas City is Kansas City, because
Yes,
if any team had a worse offseason, my God, they've had at least 5 guys get arrested and have terrible off-field incidents. And they didn't really do a ton. Like, they signed Hollywood Brown to kind of be the other side to Rashee Rice, give them some speed and playmaking ability. But now, is Rice even going to play? We talked about on the draft show. We don't know how that's going to turn out. We're still waiting on that legal situation. They're losing guys on defense. It just, the whole situation out there, I still think they're probably good enough to win a weak division, but I don't think that they're going to be the juggernaut San Francisco is. I think it'll be two wildly different situations. San Francisco wins a mediocre division fairly easily. I think Kansas City wins their division because it is so bad.
Yeah, I that's definitely kind of reinforced to the fact that Kansas City had, quote unquote, a little bit of a slower season.
Yeah.
They
could be an 11-win team this year and win the West.
They weren't the high-powered offense they were maybe in years past. Now, obviously, not high-powered for them is still, top 10 in a lot of metrics, just not leading the league in a number of metrics like they usually do. So it is a question, because, hey, they aren't as good, but like you said, 11 wins, and they could probably still win it by 3 or 4. Which is how weak the division is.
Yep.
So are we in agreement? Are we going to be pushing them up there?
That those are the two locked.
Yes. Right? So now we just get to argue the fun things, where is there a third team that is going to repeat? And I think that's kind of where we first have to start. At 76% of the time, 3 teams do back-to-back their division. If you were to pick one of these teams remaining, who would it be to repeat for their division?
This is very, very tough. Honestly, if I had to pick, it might be a little bit of a surprise, because they're not even favorites to win their division, but I might take Dallas out here. They are just such a dominant regular season team. And even though they have Philly in the same division, comparatively to what the rest of these teams are going through, the NFC East is probably the weakest, not counting the Tampa Bay in the South. But if you take the other 5 teams in their divisions in here, I would have to say the East is just the weakest. You still have the Giants and a very, very young Commanders team out there with a whole new coaching staff. So if I really had to pick, I think I would go with Dallas, because they're still returning pretty much the same exact team, super stacked on both sides of the ball. Should be able to roll through, have another double-digit regular season, and then just, Philly could do whatever. We don't know what their deal is. They have a lot of new players, especially on defense, so they might not be totally in sync there. New defensive coaching staff, all that nonsense. So I think I would actually go with Dallas, even though they're not favorites to win their division.
Do you want a fun fact on that?
Go for it.
So repeating first place historically in the last 21 years, the NFC East has done it twice. Those two repeat champions for the NFC East, the 03 and 04 Philadelphia Eagles, 3 years in a row. That is it. No team has repeated as NFC East champion in the last 20 years.
It's pretty on brand for them, I guess.
It's pretty crazy.
That is pretty crazy. That's how it kind of feels too. If you look back, there were those, Robert Griffin,
right?
Commanders teams. You've got those Dallas teams. You've got the
Eli.
Giants teams, Eli's. Yeah. So that is interesting. That is an interesting tidbit. When you do look at the odds for this division, though, V does hit it on the head, especially. Mm-hmm. You're looking at about 120 at the top for Philly, 130 for Dallas, depending on best odds where you're shopping. The Commanders and Giants are much, much further down
Way
the board.
Lower down the list. Rightfully so.
It really is just a two-team race in that division, and it makes a lot of sense. Both defenses are fairly strong at times, even though, the Eagles had a tumultuous season in the secondary, which was unlike them the season before, and they addressed that heavily in the offseason, especially in the draft, where I had loved the corners that they picked up in the draft. So it's definitely going to be an interesting note that are they going to be back? I mean, they had a lot of questions on scheme and things like that. They have all the talent in the world. Philly has all the talent in the world to win this division. A lot of times when we talk about them, they are one of the strongest 53-man rosters in the NFL every single year. And Dallas really isn't too far behind. It just always feels like Dallas is the team that beats themselves. It was a little bit of an inverse last year. So I'm really excited to see it. I could get behind Dallas in that regard. Lance, I have another question for you there. The same question I had for Vishal. Are you in on the Dallas pick there? I mean, obviously you can be, but is there anybody else that catches your eye as that third team to keep a watch on?
Honestly, Dallas is probably the one I'm most comfortable with. But for the case against it, I guess I would say, you had Jerry Jones come out at the beginning of this offseason saying we're going all in. And he is still yet to sign CeeDee Lamb or Micah Parsons as a price on each of those players, respectively, with the Jefferson deal has just skyrocketed now. They had a decent draft, but nothing where it's like, okay, we're drafting a young quarterback. This is the direction we're going. We're not going to sign. We're going to build around a rookie.
Re-signing Zeke on a veteran deal.
Exactly. And you let your young running back go.
Yeah.
Who had shown a lot of granted, he had Tony Pollard had a down year, but still, like you're essentially walking back your move from last year. Free agency, they didn't really come out and blow you away aside from, the Zeke thing is the only thing I can think of. So the case against them, I think, goes with that and the fact that, Philadelphia obviously knows Sirianni's going to be on the hot seat if they don't get their offense figured out, and it's going to be a highly sought after job. And now they have Saquon Barkley. So hopefully they'll get something going there. I'd probably go to the Lions, honestly. And the Lions were a team that I didn't really believe in going into last year. I thought the hype train for them was just getting too out of control, but their run game and Ben Johnson coming back and they just have such, their offense is just so well run with timing, landmarks, all that stuff. Where
and the defense got better.
That was the only weakness, and they fixed that with the draft, Terry and Arnold, and I think they got Kool-Aid McKinstry, if I'm not mistaken, too. So I mean, they shored up that back end. You have the Vikings, who JJ McCarthy could be a nice pick. I don't think he's going to come out like, Matt Ryan back in 2007 and just lead this team from last to first. The Bears are exciting, especially as a Bears fan, but there's too many bad things that go wrong for this organization where I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop because it's coming and I know it's coming. Green Bay really is the only team I can think of that can make a case against Detroit to win the division. But even so, Jordan Love finished the season really strong. but there were some up and downs early. And, you know, I think teams are going to come out a little bit different. And I think they're going to change a little bit on offense, and their defense at times kind of left a little bit to be desired. So I think Detroit has a good case in maybe not a weak division, but one that doesn't necessarily have as strong competition as, say, like the NFC East, where, you know, it's a 2-horse race.
Yeah, that definitely is a good point. Kool-Aid McKinstry went to the Saints, actually.
Yeah, it was Terrion Arnold, right?
Terrion Arnold went to. I think you named both, but
no, I did name Kool-Aid. I thought they came.
They got somebody. It was Arnold and somebody else.
I'm thinking of.
I'm the second
switching their draft with the Eagles, because the Eagles got
the Eagles took
got two corners.
Cooper DeJean and
Cooper DeJean.
And why am I spacing on the kid from Toledo's name?
Quez.
I don't remember either. But I know what you're talking about.
Either way, they had a good draft. But I am with you. I do think
it's
that
defense. We don't care as much about defense.
So put the ball in their hands. Come on now. So no. All jokes aside, though, when we do look at the market, it does have a pretty similar sentiment. Detroit around plus 150 to take the North. But I mean, something has to be said about Green Bay, boys. Green Bay came on strong last year.
I said it. That's
no, Steve.
Hey, Jordan, you're in a room with 3 bitter Bears fans.
I know.
We can't say good things about Green Bay.
I have to tell you,
I'm not legally allowed to say that on the internet.
Green Bay had an incredible end to that season. Jordan Love looks very polished. He has come along a far way from the kind of laugh that a lot of people used to get by them sitting him for 3 years. Well, the joke's on all of us because he's pretty dang good at football. So when we do look at that, I think at 210, where Green Bay is, that's actually one of my favorite picks to take that division. They've looked incredibly strong to close out the year. They didn't do, I mean, some people love their draft. I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but we'll see how that actually pans out. Chicago, though, here you guys go, boys. Plus 375. They're not that far back. What is our take on the Bears to potentially take this division? Young, excited. How are you guys feeling about it?
Well, consensus, I've got them plus 320, which is the second best for teams going worst to first behind Cincinnati. We didn't talk about Baltimore at all either, who was just the number 1 seed in the AFC last season. And I think it's just a foregone conclusion that they're going to lose the division to Cincinnati with healthy Joe Burrow. Is that what we're going with?
My hot take for Baltimore is I think they have the best chance out of all these teams who finished first last year to finish last in their division. I think it's going to be a tough season coming up for them. We talked about it in our
division is so good. It's just
the whole division is so good. We talked about it in the Super Bowl preview / AFC or Championship Week recap show that we did. But between Baltimore and Detroit, in terms of teams that we feel best about going forward, it was definitely feeling good about Detroit because they kept so many players and coaches. Whereas with Baltimore, you're losing players, you're losing your defensive coordinator. You're now going up against a division that is significantly healthier. You already mentioned Joe Burrow, but also Cleveland's going to be healthier across the board. Pittsburgh, you can't get any worse at quarterback than they were last year. You added 2 new guys. They have to be better. You just can't be as bad as Kenny Pickett was. And they still made the playoffs last year. So it's going to be a tough. There's no way you can pick Baltimore even at their odds right now to win that division. It's going to be hugely challenging for them.
I know you were teeing us up there, Mason, and I didn't mean to derail you there for the Bears. We'll get there in a second. I just want to fill out a little bit of this a little more.
Oh yeah, no. I like where you're headed. We can go wherever you guys want.
Because there's a 90% chance of a team going last to first, like I talked about. And then 71% of the time, 15 out of the 21 years, there has been a team to go from first to last, like Vishal just mentioned, which I think is interesting. And then we have repeating last place has happened 3 times, 21 out of the 21 years. So there have been every single season 3 teams who went from last place last year to last place again this year. So I think we can knock some of these out pretty easily. Now, there's only a 57% chance a fourth team will repeat as the worst team in their division again. But I think the easy fish in a barrel, book it, is New England. Gotta be, right?
I would lean that way as well.
Because you've got Buffalo, Miami, and the Jets with supposedly healthy Aaron Rodgers, and then the completely rebuilding Patriots.
Right.
So I would think they'd have to repeat in last. I think you could make the argument for Washington as well, but the Giants are so bad.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I don't think I'd be confident in that at all.
Yeah, it's a race to the bottom there. I don't know that would
I think it's definitely not the Bengals.
I would agree.
Well,
outside of injuries.
I think you could make an argument for Tennessee.
You could make a strong case for Tennessee.
I would take Tennessee and Carolina as the other two teams at that bottom list there.
Well, I'm good with Tennessee because I think Jacksonville's good. I think the Colts are going to be good again. They were a fringe playoff team with Gardner Minshew, and now you've got Richardson coming back healthy in year 2. And then you've got the Texans, who are on the rise and are clearly going all in. They, acquiring Diggs, making moves to try to make them and Mixon and trying to make them a Super Bowl contender while they're in CJ Stroud's rookie contract. So I think Tennessee is probably a solid pick as well in the South. What worries me about picking Carolina is Carolina is going to be bad. It's second year of Bryce Young. They'll be a little bit better than they were last season, but I feel like Tampa Bay could be the team to go first to worst.
Even though they re-signed all their guys offensively, specifically Mike Evans.
Yeah, they're basically just trying to run the same thing back. And the thing about the NFC South is we've seen it for a couple of years now. Like 9-8 wins that division. And last place in that division, other than Carolina completely tanking last year. Remember, just 2 years ago, it was Tampa were they 9-8 or 8-9? Pretty sure they were 9-8 when they won the division 2 years ago.
I think so.
Yeah.
And then everybody else in the division was 7-10. All three of them finished 7-10. Yeah. So there could very easily be a situation like that again, where maybe the Falcons win the division with 11 wins and Tampa finishes with 6 wins and Carolina finishes with 6 wins or 7 wins and they're tied.
I don't know.
I think it just required too big of a jump for Carolina. You have a new coaching staff coming that's not very proven. This is his second system in 2 years already. It feels like it's a lot. You have a couple new pieces offensively in terms of weapons with Deontay Johnson and Leggett, but that's not a great receiving room. It's probably last in that division. And then they added some pieces on the offensive line, but those aren't those are. When you're going out and signing big name free agents on the offensive line, you're not really developing young guys to grow with your quarterback. It feels like it would take quite a bit for Carolina to even make a jump to 6 or 7 wins with all the new faces around and the challenges that they've had.
Well, let's start with the AFC East. So we've got the Patriots in last. If we don't believe Buffalo is the repeat candidate, it's probably Miami, right?
You don't trust them to stay healthy either down the stretch. They usually falter.
For me, it would be the Jets. From a betting standpoint, I'm IDing the Jets because you're going to get them at let me see what their odds are right now. You are going to get them at roughly about plus 240 is where I'm seeing it.
I've got Miami and the Jets both at plus 200 to win the division.
Okay. Looks like at best odds, you can get them a little bit higher, but still, I mean, the whole market being right there in that kind of area shows me that
either way, because for our purposes, all we really care about is it just means Buffalo isn't winning the division again.
Right. Well, I mean, I think people talk about Buffalo's receivers, but nobody talks about the fact that they just lost the backbone of their defense in the secondary with both of their safeties. I mean, that goes over a lot of people's heads. I, for one, don't see them repeating as that division champion. But with New York, I mean, for me, it's just that you have, Rodgers, he's a wild card. They didn't have him at all. They're still a very strong roster. And when we look at what their odds were last year to win the division, they were in a similar spot, maybe a little bit longer, but I'm all in for that. That would be my bet to take the division there. But yeah, I completely agree. Patriots at the bottom there too.
And then, so I don't know. It's tough, but I would think, because when we're talking about worst to first, right? We already know it's not the Chargers.
Sure.
And I don't think that I think it's either Denver with their crazy quarterback situation or the Raiders with their crazy quarterback situation that ends up on the bottom of the West.
Yeah, I think that's
Denver.
Yeah.
So are we good with the Chargers being in the middle of the road?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree.
Washington, we're making an argument, is either last or the Giants are last. So that's a question mark. And then Carolina are the Panthers going to overtake the Falcons or the Bucks?
No.
Or even the Saints?
Steve, the Bucks won a playoff game. Steve, the Bucks won a playoff game.
I know.
And they almost won a second. I mean, it was pretty close down in Detroit.
I know that Baker's not the best quarterback.
I'm not saying they're a bad team. I was the guy on here every week pounding the table for Baker Mayfield in fantasy lineups. Right?
Baker's
he
a gamer,
almost
baby.
won me a championship.
Baker's a gamer. Close. So, while I don't think Tampa Bay is going to repeat as a division champion, I think that they're going to be in the middle of the board, which is another one that we can talk about. When we talk about the odds in the South there, Carolina's at plus 1,200. They're one of the longest odds to win their division out of any team in the NFL for 2024. So that would be a huge jump for them to potentially jump anybody in that division, even with how lowly the division is. So I agree with V on that. I would say Carolina there, but that's why we have Lance, baby. Lance, bring us home. Break this tie. Where are you thinking in the South?
So between Washington and Carolina is basically where we're staked right now.
Well, and Arizona, because does Arizona pass the Rams and the Seahawks to get out of last?
And see, I don't see Arizona doing that. But for the sake of argument, I feel a lot better about Washington than I do New York right now. I mean, you lost the engine of your offense in Saquon Barkley and replaced him with Devin Singletary. And Devin Singletary was phenomenal last year. I had him as rookie year. I love the player. But in terms of what they've built their offense around, you need Daniel Jones to take a step that generally isn't taken by a quarterback who's as far along as he. It's essentially, I'm probably off on the age here, but you're asking him to take a Ryan Tannehill step. And, I think Malik Neighbors is talented, and I think he's going to be a great receiver in this league. I don't see it happening. So I do see Washington finishing above New York. I will go Carolina. NFC South is a weak division. You could probably pull up the numbers. They probably switched division winners almost just as much as the NFC East is. But
let's see.
Carolina
NFC South repeating champions 7 times in the last 21 years. NFC South repeating last place also 7 times in the last 21 years.
If there's an argument in the NFC South for another team finishing last, I would actually take the Saints over the Bucks there. So what are the Saints doing? What are they? Who are they?
That's what I'm saying. Like, Carolina has made some decent moves, especially in the draft, to put stuff around Bryce Young and changed out I know that he's going into his second year with a new offense again. But to me, I don't think they're as bad as a 2-win team again. I don't think they're going to be that terrible. And the Saints aren't doing anything. I think they can very easily pass the Saints. I think
I talk about the Saints all the time. So
I think it's far more likely that the Saints completely tank out, or the Bucks get hit with some kind of injury or injuries that completely derails what they're doing, and Carolina passes somebody, as opposed to the Seahawks or Rams completely falling off the rails and Carolina and Arizona is able to overtake them.
And see, I'm not totally against anything for Carolina being a better team this year.
Mm.
And I do agree that the Saints don't like they've essentially been bleeding out ever since Drew Brees left. Like they've just been limping on with just enough to get by. And between their salary cap issues and everything else that's gone on with Michael Thomas and yada yada, I'll give you that wholeheartedly. I just feel better about the Saints at this point than I do the Giants, and I feel the Giants are the easier team to leapfrog than the Saints.
Yeah. So I think we're all in agreement. Giants in last, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Washington mid, and then with the East,
Philly.
we had talked about the Cowboys being the repeat candidate, but like I said, historically, it just doesn't happen. And to me, what bothers me the most about the Cowboys, like you talked about, Vishal, the dominating the regular season, being a great regular season team. To me, what hurts them is, yes, they were great in the regular season, but they beat the Lions on a very questionable call on the ineligible downfield. They got blown out by the Bills. They got blown out by the 49ers. They lose the game on the road to Miami. Anytime they played a competent team, they got decimated. And then they lose to the Packers at home in a game they were heavily favored in the playoffs. So I think for that to happen last year, for them to look as mediocre as they did against great teams, and then to come into this offseason and do nothing, to literally just say, let's run it back. Mike McCarthy, do it one more time. Don't worry, Dak and CeeDee Lamb, maybe we'll pay you next year, depending on what happens this season. It's the craziest, most batshit Jerry Jones thing I have ever seen, and it's not surprising in any way, shape, or form, but I can't get on board with them being division champions again. For Philly, I know they fell off at the end of the season, but man, their season would have to go way sideways, I think, for them to lose the division to the Cowboys again.
I mean, and it ended up being a closer race than it probably even should have been, given how kind of horrendous that secondary was in Philly. We cashed in against them a number of times. But you're right. The entire season, we could never faithfully rely on which Cowboys team we were going to get. Personally, if I were to talk about another team that is going to, or in my opinion, have that shot at repeating, I mean, I would have to say it has to be the Texans. They're obviously so strong. But I mean, when we look at like the Jags, who I think a lot of people would say is that, big piece of competition in that division, I would say that they're head and shoulders above them in very key metrics and key positions as well. That secondary is, quietly very scary out there in Houston. That receiving core is obviously lethal. CJ Stroud just brings it all together. I don't see how they don't win the division. And at plus 110, I think odds makers agree.
Can I say I like the Colts as my favorite sleeper non-division leader to come out and win their division?
Okay.
My goodness.
Anthony Richardson torched the Texans when he was healthy last year. He's only getting better. Their team is better. Their defense is better. Offense is better. Give me the Colts to win that division.
Yeah, but didn't they not have Sting? Wasn't Sting not in?
To start the season, he might not have been.
I don't think he was in at the beginning of the season.
Anthony Richardson did most of his damage against them with his legs. He had 2 rushing touchdowns in that game. I think it was like week 2. He absolutely demolished them. And then he had that great game against the Rams through the air and on the ground. I don't know. I'm all in on Anthony Richardson this year. I think he's going to have a monster season.
V, we're going to have to break into this more on the show later.
We will.
You're not going to get away with this. You're not.
That's like one of my only futures that I like this year is the Colts to win the division.
All right. I think I'm going to stick with Philly and go with the Cowboys in second. They're still probably a playoff team in a weak NFC.
Oh, yeah. If they don't make the playoffs,
that would be
eject everybody in that organization to the sun.
Right.
They don't get enough flack for not like spending.
And then in
they
the
do
South,
the Green Bay thing. So
we're going to go with Carolina then to finish last in the South.
I mean, odds
If
makers
you want
would
to put
put it that
Arizona,
way.
I'd be fine with that as well.
That's where I would put it, but I think I could definitely lean Arizona too. I think they're flashy though, man. I want to like Arizona. I want them to put up a bunch of points and have some resurgence. But that's just me personally, so I could see it. But
it's really just, is
makes
Arizona
sense.
good enough to get past Seattle?
So when we put it into perspective, odds makers also are up there, plus 113 for Arizona to win the division. So I think for them to potentially, that's well below everybody else. Even Seattle's plus 800, which is still pretty far. But yeah, I mean, what do you think? What are we
I'm
thinking,
seeing
boys?
more out of Kyler Murray, and you have their pieces already: Greg Dortch, Michael Wilson, Trey McBride. Now you put Marvin Harrison in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot more versus Carolina. They're, Deontay Johnson's a great wide receiver, and I think he's gonna, fit right in to Bryce Young's number one. But there needs to be so much other stuff that happens for them to get on the right track. We've seen Arizona, I think it was 2 or 3 years, maybe 2020, maybe, where they were the last team undefeated and then skidded right into the playoffs and then got beat by the Rams, I want to say, and the Rams went on to win the Super Bowl. So, I mean, you've seen it with Arizona before. Granted, the names on the back of the jerseys catching the ball were different, but I got more faith in Kyler Murray and this offense than I do in Bryce Young and what we haven't seen yet.
Answering my own question from earlier, 2 years ago, Tampa won the division at 8-9. The other 3 teams in the division were 7-10. And last year, Carolina went from a 7-10 team to a 2-15 team somehow by switching to Bryce Young. So now they come back this season. They've added the stuff around him to try to help him out. But last year, Tampa won the division at 9-8. They were tied with the Saints, who, despite themselves, also went 9-8. And Atlanta went 7-10 and was in the race until the end of the season. I think Atlanta, we all agree Atlanta leapfrogs everybody, right? Like, it's their division to lose.
Yeah, I would agree.
So then if we've got Tampa in the middle here, it's just, are the Saints bad enough to go from a 9-8 team to get passed by the 2-15 Panthers? And I think we're saying no.
No, I mean, they still have Chris Olave. They still have Alvin Kamara. They still have guys on defense. I mean, they're not great, but they're still mid. I think you put them at the top. But
Oop, I did. Yep. Here we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
So then,
and I think something needs to be said about foundationally. I like where Arizona is more with Monty Ossenfort at GM than anything that can be done in Carolina under, Dave Tepper as owner. When you have a guy going to restaurants, berating hostesses, like, I think you're looking at the Carolina Panthers are going to be the new ineptitude of the NFL for the next decade. Sorry to anybody.
They're drafting a quarterback in the first round next year, right? I mean, the odds are.
I think they're going to be drafting a quarterback at 1-1 next year, frankly. In my opinion, I think they're going to be drafting at 1-1 because they are going to be the new Commanders. We talk about this for years with the Commanders, that as soon as they were out from Dan Schneider, they were going to be a much better run offense or a much better run organization, because foundationally it was just not a good place to be in the NFL. Everybody agreed. They didn't get any free agents. They were terrible at drafting. It was a absolute wreck there. Coaches didn't want to go there. It's a tough place. And now they have new ownership. We'll see how this whole thing turns out there. But I think that you could look at that as a case study on what could very well go wrong with a team like Carolina. When we talk about, wow, questionable, they went from, this many wins to 2 wins. They had that big of a loss after picking 1-1 to the point that the Bears got the first pick this year. Think about this. Carolina, do you think that they're kicking themselves that they have Bryce Young when they could have waited another year after 2 wins and gotten Caleb Williams? I personally think yes.
Yeah.
They should be. So, I mean, everything's in hindsight, but I think that shows you what actual rock bottom could look like, and the Carolina Panthers could be the embodiment of it.
Well, and I think to add on to your point there, they just had Adam Thielen come over a year ago, and he's already come out and said, we probably have the worst practice facilities in the NFL right now. So, I mean, what incentive does that give any other free agent or rookie or anyone who's coming in there to want to go there. When you have a guy who's not even been there 1 year and he's coming out and saying something like that, and Adam Thielen, living in Minnesota, having Adam Thielen be, the hometown kid from Mankato, makes it onto the Vikings. He doesn't talk a lot. So if he's coming out and saying something, it kind of speaks volumes as to how bad it actually must be for him to want to go out of his way, not stay in his lane like he normally does and say something like that.
Let's see. We finished up most of the West here. Denver, we said, right? For last?
I would say so.
I would
Yes.
take them
I
last.
think so.
Feels right. Sorry, Sean.
And then LA is probably a mid team, right? Behind San Francisco.
Right.
Wild card contender.
Right.
obviously.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So then it's Seattle and Arizona. And I will say, like I mentioned, just historically, 3 teams repeating last place has happened every single year. 4 teams repeating last place has happened 57% of the time. So just over half. But in recent history, for 3 years in a row, we have had at least 4 teams repeating last. And 8 of the last 10 seasons, we've had 4 teams repeating last. So
the
putting
law of
Arizona
averages
back
says
in
we're
last
due for one.
place is not out of the realm of possibility that they can finish in last and Seattle's up in the mid. Are we good with keeping that?
I'm good with that.
Okay. I'm just color coordinating. Don't mind me. So then we come back to the other one. So we've got the Bengals and the Bears. 90% of the time, there is at least one team, or really it's only one team. 91% of the time, one team can go from last to first. 2 times in a single season, it's only happened 38% of the time. So it would be an extreme rarity for 2 teams to make that kind of leap. The argument for both of them is that the Bengals really just lost Joe Burrow. And the reason that they ended up in last place was because they didn't have their star starting quarterback. And even in last place, they went 9-8 and had a good showing and were a decent team. So with Burrow back healthy, and you've got Jamar Chase, they brought back T. Higgins. We'll see how long that lasts. But they lost Mixon, is probably the biggest piece they're going to be missing on offense. Is it cut and paste that they're able to just take over the AFC North?
No, come on. The Ravens re-signed Rashard Bateman. What do you mean?
Derrick Henry. I mean, they're going to run the hell out of people this season.
I think that I'm a little bit removed from these take that they're going to go first to worst, but I think that undoubtedly the Bengals are a strong contender to take that division, where it does not necessarily paint them in the light of being this team that's going to repeat as the winner. They do have Derrick Henry. They are going to run the hell out of the ball, but there are some questions on how much tread is left on Derrick Henry's tires. Everybody has been feeding this man for over a decade. The buck has to stop at some point. And a lot of the times that happens when these backs do move to a new environment. It's not necessarily talked about enough that an unfamiliar environment with a player, especially in the NFL, trades do not necessarily equate the same way in the NFL as they do to other sports, baseball, the NBA, things like that, where guys very much come and go. And the new environment does not always mean a huge drop off in production. But in the NFL, it does, because terminology, things like that, it's really hard for guys to get into new areas. So I don't know. I think that that's definitely going to be an issue. I don't know that we're going to see Derrick Henry, bowl over every single defense that they run into.
Yeah.
But I definitely don't see them as the team that's going to go to last, but still very strong Bengals. I think they're up there. They're going to protect Joe Burrow a little bit better. I uncovered some interesting, stats around Joe Burrow and the Bengals, is that Joe Burrow checked the ball down, up there with the top rates in the NFL last season. A lot of it was because, he's still feeling the effects of being pressured a lot. He had a knockdown on almost 10% of his dropbacks. So when you're a quarterback and you're getting hit like that, it's tough. So if they protect him, I mean, it's kind of really, really tough to beat them with what they have offensively.
We saw what they did against San Fran last year when he was actually healthy. The one of the few times he was healthy, they went into San Fran and put up a big show offensively. So I know we know what their potential still is when everybody is healthy. So it's tough to pick against them right now.
Yeah,
and the AFC North is really the complete opposite of the NFC South. The NFC South is, well, one of these teams has to win the division. Like we got to pick one of them. Somebody's got to do it. The AFC North is you can take all four of those teams, put the names in a hat, draw the name out, and tell me that's the division winner. And I'd say, yeah, I could see it. You can make an argument for that. That makes sense to me. You could pull a name out and say they're going to finish in last. And I would say, yeah, the other three teams are really good in the division. So that 100% could happen. I would totally believe it. I think the argument for the Bengals more than anything is like I just laid out. The fact that the worst case nightmare scenario for Cincinnati is Joe Burrow gets hurt. And they went 9-8 and still almost made the playoffs with their backup quarterback. So if you're coming into this season with a healthy Joe Burrow, even without Mixon and that established running game, I think they're solid enough that adding him back into that mix makes them, especially having the last place team's schedule. They get every other AFC division's last place team from last year. They have the lighter road than anyone else. I think it's the easiest path to get to the division title than anybody else.
Agreed.
Yeah, and you take, the Ravens and the Bengals, both of them have some injury concerns at quarterback. But if both of them come out and play and stay healthy, play their best, I'm taking Bengals 10 times out of 10 because you've seen them reach the Super Bowl. You've seen them play at a higher level versus, not to take anything away from the Ravens, but you just haven't seen them string that consistently together.
With Cleveland, it's, Deshaun is a shell of himself, and all the off-field stuff obviously plays a role in that. But they looked great with Joe Flacco. So you would think having Deshaun in there healthy would help them, but you don't know. And then with the Steelers, which Russell Wilson are you getting? Are you getting Russell Wilson from the Seahawks, who played with the Legion of Boom and now has this Steelers defense to prop him up and just don't lose us games, Russ? Go out there and hand the ball off to Warren and Najee Harris? Or are you getting the Broncos? Let's cook, and not cooking at all, just burning down the kitchen. So which one are you getting? That's the question. And if it doesn't work out with Russ, they've got Justin Fields behind him to see what they have there. So it's a questionable quarterback situation, but you can argue it's the best quarterback situation that they've had pretty easily since Roethlisberger
for
left.
years. Yeah. You're right. There's a universe where, something goes some way, and we're looking at some, clickbait Bleacher Report betting tweet where somebody called that, the Steelers were going to win 14 games this season or whatever it is, because that's all that Bleacher Report does is do clickbait. Yeah. So when we look at stuff like that, there's a universe where all of them win. Odds makers obviously put the Browns and the Steelers much lower than these other two teams, which is understandable. So there is a world where, the Ravens drop maybe more than just one spot, but I think that definitely one of the gimmies for me is the Bengals to go worst to first, for sure.
Okay. Do we agree with that sentiment?
Yeah.
I agree.
We're good on that? Okay.
Yep.
It's not the Bears.
It's tough. Well, look, I'll make the argument for the Bears because you all want to bait me into it. I'll do it. That's fine. I'll make the argument.
No, don't.
Very easily, best quarterback situation they've ever had. They go out. They already had DJ Moore. They already had Cole Kmet, and they add Keenan Allen. They add Roma Dunze. They don't do much on the offensive line, but they do depth adds on the offensive line that will help. And from the time they added Montez Sweat last year, they were a top 5 defense the second half of the season. So if they're going to run back the defense with a weak schedule, yes, you have a rookie quarterback, which is the biggest thing against you, but Minnesota is going to finish in last. That's an easy one. That's a dunk. Green Bay, I think, is probably the bigger threat to overtaking the Lions in year one of Caleb Williams. But I think you could make the argument that if the Bears can split with the Lions and the Packers, they have a legitimate shot to win 11 games and win the division.
Yeah,
Is
their
it
big
as
question
likely as
is
the Bengals winning it? No. But I think they have a shot. They're at the very least in the mid. They're in the wild card conversation with LA, I think.
yeah, they just need Eberflus to not get in their way because I still don't know what he does there. And
To get yeah.
Yeah.
Until they can actually beat the Packers, because I could not tell you the last time the Bears beat the Packers. It doesn't matter.
16?
18.
18?
Yeah, and tell me that wasn't a
Was it-
Week 17 game where they pulled half their starters and just, I
It
mean,
was like week
it's been-
14. You can give them a little bit of credit, but it was late on the season.
the disrespect and just everything that is gone on with that. I mean, for the Bears organization, that has to be the one thing you have to focus on coming into the season is just get one of those wins. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not asking for playoffs. I'm not asking for Super Bowl. Just beat the Packers once. That's all I
If we beat
want.
the Packers, that is our Super Bowl. I don't know what you're
That's
talking about.
exactly. And I am more than okay with being mocked for that.
But I think
Like, that's
between
fine.
between the Bears and the Packers, I think the division is strong enough that it's going to knock the Lions down and their tough schedule so that they're out of that first place spot, right? I don't think they're the third team.
Yeah, and I mean for me, I am higher on the Packers than I would say. Like I really do think Detroit is still the strongest team out there. I just think that it is a question of, the Packers are going to run them a little bit. They're going to press them a little bit. And I think even in regards to the Bears, I know that we don't want to get too high of expectations for the Bears, but if I'm sprinkling a little bit of money in the division, it's about at plus 375 for the Bears, because when I look at this division on paper and how the Bears are going to match up, well, specifically one of the first spots that everybody talks about, obviously, is the receivers. They have very strong receivers. It's going to be hard for any defense in the NFL to match up for them. Be ready for them to, lead in or be in the top 5 in the league in passing yardage. That's just how it's going to come out to. What we have to look at is that this defense, especially in the secondary, actually matches up a lot better than some would think. You have Jalen Johnson, who was one of the best corners or the highest rated corner in the NFL last year. He was incredible, and he's going to be coming back. But then one thing that you have to talk about is you had Tyreek Stevenson, who I think a lot of people see his boneheaded plays where guys are running past him downfield, but he was kind of the epitome of highly volatile coverage play last season. And in his first year, he's going to be coming back. I think he can only go up from there. I think he's going to have a little bit better eyes. He's not going to get beaten on boneheaded, jabs and guys that just really shouldn't have beat him there. And I think you could see a really, really good cornerback tandem there. It's going to be really interesting to watch. And when we look at that, I think that's going to be their strong point. While, Detroit has some strong receivers with, the Sun God, I think that the Bears have the pieces to match up with that. And also same goes for Green Bay. So I'm a little bit higher on the Bears. That's where I would be sprinkling. I know that it's a little bit of a reach to say they go worst to first, but I'm not that far removed from them going, worst to second or competing for that division. I think they could very well get in there, which is why I think you have to fade the Lions, especially at plus 150. It just only makes sense for me. So sorry, that's my roundabout way of saying I'm with whoever you guys pick to take the division, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, reluctantly, I believe that we're putting Green Bay up here.
Sure.
But my biggest issue with Green Bay is the defense is okay. It's not spectacular, but it's okay. It gets the job done. And still, they lost Aaron Jones to Minnesota, which is hilarious. And they got Josh Jacobs and then brought back AJ Dillon for some reason to just keep not using him. I don't know. They brought back AJ Dillon for a few $1 million to just keep putting his thighs on Instagram in the summer to just
sex sells, Steve.
get
Sex
those
sells.
likes.
Come on.
And that's it. That's all you use them for.
Engagement.
So I don't know. Their receiving core is terrible. They have to be easily the worst receiving core in the division, right? Like it's not close.
Sure.
So they've got Love, which is fine. Their offense doesn't wow you. They're going to win a lot of games 17-14. It's not sexy, but I think that they could go 11-6 and win the division. And then
Sure.
the Lions, just coming off of that high from last year, I think have a little bit of a drop off. The Bears got better. Packers are still there being competitive. And then they're facing different opponents. They're not going to sneak up on anybody this season like they might have last year. So the biggest question for me, if we've got Cincinnati going worst to first, then that means we've got the Browns and the Steelers and the Ravens. Vishal is in the camp of the Ravens are a team that goes from first to last.
Yep.
That has happened 71% of the time. We've had a team go from first to worst the following season. Let's see. Last year we had one go first to worst.
Probably Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same division.
Yeah, it's just that division is just too strong. I don't think Baltimore did anything to improve themselves this year. Adding Derrick Henry is fine, but anybody who rostered Henry in fantasy last year, like I did, knows he was not the same guy. He's older. He doesn't have the legs anymore. Too much mileage on there. I don't know how much of an impact he's actually going to make there. And then, Lamar stayed healthy last year. Can he? That's still a question mark, though. That was that a blip, him staying healthy, or was it him, missing a few games at the end of the season going to be more likely this year? So there's just too many factors, I think, pointing against Baltimore to feel great about them this year.
I'm going to lobby for Cleveland at the back.
That would be my next choice. If you're not going to take Baltimore, my next choice would be
personally
because of Watson.
You have the question of how does Watson mold with this offense? They did not look good with him, but all of a sudden Joe Flacco looks like old school elite Joe with him. And it got to the point that V and I are sitting here week in and week out at the end of the season going, what do we do with the Browns? Do we bet on the Browns? So we win some money here and then all of a sudden they completely fall off a cliff, or, they barely...
You would have to think, though, if they felt not great about him internally, they would have more of a backup plan than they do right now. I don't even know who their backup is right now.
Jameis Winston.
Yeah.
Jameis Winston. I mean, I don't know if that's really telling you that they feel uncomfortable with Deshaun going out there, because if you felt bad about it, why wouldn't you just bring back Flacco, who seemed like he was still interested in continuing to play?
I mean, they can't feel bad about it. They have so much dead money wrapped up. I mean,
but even
Broncos
then, I mean,
are going to be feeling bad about
you can keep him on the team, but you don't have to go in as him being your surefire starter
as the one and only guy. Yeah,
right. If they, so I feel like they have some sense that there's some rebound coming, but it's hard to say from the outside. Really, you'd have to see it to believe it at this point.
And then you have to ask the question about Nick Chubb's brutal injury. I mean, he's the heart of that offense, and I know that they found some production without him, but on a long-term basis, I think they caught more teams by surprise than we're giving them credit for, and they would be my pick to go last in the division. Obviously, they still have Myles Garrett, and what an elite pass rush can do and pressure can do is absolutely game-changing, and that was a lot of the reason why they were winning. Even though from an EPA standpoint, they weren't absolutely blowing teams out of the water defensively at the end of the season when they were successful. So it's kind of one of those juxtapositions of stats versus results. It's one of those things that when you get a bigger sample size, everything returns back to the mean. So I think as the season goes on, we'll have to kind of see, but they would be my pick to go at the end.
Like I said, you could put the names in a hat and I could give you an argument for it. I can make the argument for Pittsburgh. They were 10-7. They made the playoffs last year with arguably no quarterback. They basically had a jugs machine back there, and their defense carried them into the playoffs. So now they have a real quarterback. In fact, they have two okay quarterbacks who could do the job better than the guys that they had last season. So you could make the argument that they're a better team this year, but the defense is also older. They lost Deontay Johnson. Najee Harris has not been the dominant guy that was hyped up as a first-round pick. Jaylen Warren's basically taken that job from him. So it's more of a two-headed monster in a committee, if anything. So can they run the ball and play defense effectively and come back this season with two new quarterbacks, learning the system, trying to adjust while the rest of the division is so good, and finish ahead of another team?
Steve, they're going to throw. They're going to throw the ball. Okay, so I uncovered something the other day. All right, so follow me on this. Everybody in the chat, follow me on this for a second. Let me wax poetic for a second. So, I was looking into some numbers, and don't laugh at me first and foremost. Okay, Arthur Smith gets a lot of flack, and I get it. Questionable play calling. It's a lot of issues. They had no production despite a ton of weapons. I will continue to say that they were absolutely a detriment under center. They had no idea what they were doing there. The quarterbacks were the issue, undoubtedly. And I know that that's not a huge hot take to say, but I think that Arthur Smith gets a lot of flack for the offense or for the offensive struggles that the quarterbacks brought on. They did not have keyed in checkdowns on a lot of these reads. They were throwing the ball downfield and just couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. It was really, really bad when I was back cutting on the tape. I know there's a lot of noteworthy throws in their, discography of just horrendous throws that they had. But I think Arthur Smith got a lot of flack. Going to be in Pittsburgh this year, and I think that his scheme, they throw the ball downfield quite a bit, and I think that that's right in Russell's wheelhouse. One of the issues with Sean Payton's offense is that Russell can't hit a mid-range throw to save his life, but he can throw the ball downfield. They just don't have a lot of those progressions built in that he's super comfortable with. That's why you had a guy like Russell absolutely lead the league in checkdowns, because it was either check it down or throw it over the top, and their offense just wasn't built for that in Denver. But what we're going to see is something like that in Pittsburgh. I think it's going to fit what Russell did in Seattle a lot more than it did in Denver. So I think that when we look at that, I think their floor is a lot higher. Now, they're not going to blow the doors off of anybody by any means, but I think they're going to catch a few teams by surprise. That I would put them above the Browns.
I still think the worst team in this division is probably an 8 or 9 win team, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, just defensively, all four of those.
All four teams are going to be competing for a playoff spot by the time we're in week 16, assuming there's no crazy injuries.
Right.
So then that brings us back to the AFC South.
Indy.
Vishal is pounding the table quite literally for Indy. You've got the Jaguars, who are a year removed from going worst to first themselves, and dealt with injuries, dealt with some turnover and turmoil and some adversity last season. So do they rebound, come back, and retake the division? Or, like I said, to me, it's the Texans going all in that has kind of sold me on them. The reason that they're odds on, they're the third highest to repeat going into this season. You could definitely make the argument that they had a weak schedule, and that helped them get to where they were with their 10 wins to win the division. The Jags went 9-8. The Colts went 9-8 without their quarterback. Texans barely won the division last year, but then they add Diggs. They make moves that say they want to win now and push to win now. So I don't know. I don't know if Indy can take them over. I'm scared of Anthony Richardson. He looked good in the limited work that we saw, but I don't know, man. Florida quarterbacks in the NFL.
So I'll say this, that I definitely think that the Colts are going to finish over the Jags. I think that the Jags are, wow, Trevor Lawrence, I feel like, there's some questions about his progression as a passer, I guess, in some regards, but
overblown discussions about him not being
right.
Like being a mid quarterback. He's still a very, very good quarterback.
Yeah, I think he's a very, very good quarterback.
I'm concerned about Jacksonville or not Trevor Lawrence. It's everything.
Right, exactly. I think they have other questions. They have other holes in their roster. I don't think they necessarily got a lot better this offseason. I think, obviously, you have to ask the question, the Colts get Anthony Richardson back. Can they look better than the Jags? I think that it's not that far out of the realm of possibility that that's the case. I do, however, respectfully think that that's out of this world with the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans had how much money did the Houston Texans win us last year, V? You're a traitor. You're a traitor, V.
That was last year. I don't care about last year. I care about this year.
The dust is settled. It's a new year.
But all jokes aside, I like what they do. I think they're stronger defensively. They were young defensively. Two really, really good defensive rookies over there, or excuse me, defensive rookie of the year over there. And then they have, a lot of young talent on that offense. And then they just supplemented it by adding Diggs. I mean, are we even going to just not talk about Nico? Like, I mean, they're going to be hard to match up with a lot of teams in the NFL, let alone what's going to happen in their division. Who in Indy is going to cover this offense? I don't know who they're. I don't know. I just don't see it happening. I just don't.
Those are gonna be some great games, though, man. Those are games circled on my calendar. 2 games. I hope they're both in prime time. Now, those are gonna be some fun ones.
Those are gonna be one of our head-to-heads this year, probably, Humvee.
Let's do it. Season long head-to-head.
Win.
Okay. Let's just do a win total season long head-to-head.
Well, on consensus right now, I think that's actually the sweet spot. Is consensus right now, Indy is plus 320 to win the South. The Bears plus 320 to win the North. And then you've got the Rams plus 330 to win the West. I think if you were going to take some longer shot plays, that's probably where you want to go.
Yep. For sure.
Historically, like I mentioned, we've got 95% of the time, 2 teams have repeated. 76%, so about 3/4 of the time, we've had at least 3. I'm with Mason in the camp that I think the Texans are the 3rd team that are going to repeat. We've had 4 teams repeat 48% of the time, so about 50-50. But just in recent history, we have had at least 4 teams repeat as division champion in 5 of the last 6 years. So, I mean, part of that was the Bills kind of backdoored their way into repeating because of Miami falling apart at the end of the season. But could that happen again this year? Sure, theoretically, but I think you really have to have that same kind of best case scenario of everything goes sideways for the Jets and the Dolphins completely crumble and can't stay healthy. But to have only 2 teams repeat, you'd have to go back to 2016 is the last time that's happened. So I feel pretty good about Houston being that other team.
And I think, even in our conversations tonight, we could make the argument that Detroit was that 4th team that we've kind of, in Dallas to a degree, but we're right there in the same notion too, that it could be interchangeable. I think this is obviously one that we're a little questioning.
Lance, what do you think? Are we crazy here? Is Vishal right? Is he in the right path?
It's not unrealistic because, sure. I feel like the way, and Houston made a plethora of moves this offseason where it makes it seem like they're going to be the next juggernaut. They're getting the same treatment that Josh Allen got after he broke out, Joe Burrow got after he broke out, and now CJ Stroud is the next thing that's going to dethrone, potentially dethrone Patrick Mahomes. But you think about the end of the season last year, these teams were neck and neck,
right?
And you weren't really sure who was going to pull ahead. And, Houston did only finish 1 win above Indianapolis and Jacksonville. So I don't think it's unrealistic that Jacksonville makes a push. I don't think it's unrealistic that Indianapolis makes a push. I probably would lean a little bit more towards Jacksonville, but at the same time, CJ Stroud did have an incredible year last year, but probably the more impressive thing was their defense and what DeMeco Ryans was able to do to turn that defense that was just abysmal into one that was actually pretty stout and pretty tough to deal with. And, when you get into a dogpile division like that, where you have 3 teams that are really close, I think something like a stout defense could be the difference. So I would probably side with Houston here. As much as I want to take Jacksonville, I think Houston, between Stingley, between Will Anderson, they got Danielle Hunter. They're extremely aggressive. Now that doesn't always pay off in the regular season. I remember the Philadelphia Dream Team when they had Michael Vick and all those other guys. But, if if I had to choose one of these 3 horses to bet on, I'd probably have to just play it safe and go Houston here, even though my heart says Jacksonville.
I mean, to Vishal's point, I'll give you credit that the wild card in all of it is Richardson. If he comes out and has a spectacular sophomore season coming off the injury, then they can 100% just outscore teams to put them in a position to pass the Texans. If the Texans have a harder schedule and things kind of go sideways for them, they could absolutely do that. I do like we talked about, that if there is a 4th team, a dark horse, I think it's more the Lions holding their ground in the North than the Bills, because just they've lost so many pieces. It feels like they're kind of on the back end of the current roster that they've got. They're sort of in a transition. So to me, I think this is kind of the end of that run. They got to rebuild a little bit around Josh Allen. And you've got the Dolphins and the Jets, who are 2 threats to pass them. Whereas like the Colts are more of a wild card, and the Jags are the same thing. It's kind of, can their defense stay healthy? Can Lawrence perform well? Can they turn everything around to get back to where they were? Again, a 9-8 team last year just didn't live up to the expectations that they had earned from the season before.
I mean, at the end of the day, we have additions and subtractions to all these teams. Who moves the needle most in this division? Stephon Diggs coming into Texas to play in a relatively similar area as his brother and where some of his family is, or Anthony Richardson coming back to Indy?
I mean, the quarterback is always going to be more important than the wide receiver 10 times out of 10. It's just, can he do it?
Yeah, but I mean, we have to add, like, one of them's proven to be able to do it. The other one is a guy that had a
wild card,
had a high draft stock, and
I don't think it's just Diggs. I think it's Diggs and Mixon and solidifying a running game to go with the passing game you already had with Stroud, plus the defense that you turned around with DeMeco Ryans. So I think that's, for me, it's just they stay good on defense and they got even better on offense from where they were as a 10-7 team last year.
Yeah.
But yeah, Colts are right there with the Bears as a team that I'm good sprinkling a little something on to get my $10 to try to turn it into something $33, $35. Just double my money up a little bit.
Victories in the margins, Steve.
Exactly. All right, guys, got any closing thoughts for us here? We've got our list.
Well, looks good to me. I think this all makes sense.
Except for the Colts, right?
Yeah, I'll let you guys have this one. We'll check in again at the end of the season.
That's right. We'll come back and see just exactly how wrong we were.
Screenshot this, save it.
It doesn't need to be at the end of the season. I know that
it'll come up frequently. Don't worry.
If the Colts are winning, I'm going to hear it weekly. I'm going to hear it.
That's going to be a new segment on our show. Every week checking in on the AFC.
Yeah, that's going to be what we have to do.
Yeah. Checking in on the Colts with Fashal and Mason. We'll have a little bump, little segment, little dancing logo.
Right.
I like it. I see it right now.
Right.
Mine's already working on it. All right. Thanks, guys, for being here. Appreciate it. Again, everybody, if you're on YouTube, give us the subscribe, follow on Twitch, and I don't know, just like it on X. I don't know. I don't think anything actually helps us on X, but if you're watching on X, hi, welcome. Thanks for being here. But yeah, keep up with all of us on Important Nonsense and at importantnonsense.com. Until next time, keep up the nonsense.